What's up next?
Next one is from Phil Haventhal. Hey, John, I read today that Captain Marvel has already passed $500 million at the box office
Ooh,
and now has officially pushed the Marvel Cinematic Universe box office total to over 18 billion. It's a number so big it's hard to wrap our heads around. I was wondering if you and Robert could put that milestone into perspective for us.
it's funny. We're so used to these days hearing the $1 billion club and this billion that we stop appreciating that letter B in front of the billion mark. We stop appreciating that for what it really is and represents. For this cinematic universe, well, I guess first let's start with Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel has already crossed 500 million worldwide, which is nuts. There were many people out there who thought it was going to lose money. It's already well profitable and heading well on its way to being a huge overall hit. And that's good. But the bigger story here in context is the fact that with 21 movies, this franchise has crossed the $18 billion mark, which seems almost ludicrous and stupid. But when you think about it, the MCU has 6 films in the $1 billion club and one of the very, very exclusive members of the $2 billion club. So in the $1 billion club, you got Avengers Infinity War, the original Avengers, Age of Ultron, Black Panther, Iron Man 3, and Captain America Civil War. You have 6 films in your franchise in the $1 billion club, which is ludicrous. And 18 billion overall? Like, there are directors and studios and filmmakers that would kill their own mother to have a film make 500 million at the box office. To make 500 million at the box office. You're talking about on average, this thing is making what, 700 million per film? Is that I'll have to do the math in my head later, but this is ridiculous and nutty. You cannot overstate what's the best way to put this, Rob? You cannot overstate.
It's unprecedented. There's never been this kind of success in Hollywood on this scale ever. There's nothing that even comes close to this. And if you look at a lot of the other movies that didn't hit $1 billion, I mean, you're looking at a lot of members of the $800 million club.
Yeah.
$700 million club. The early MCU movies, were made less money because they were new, but what they've built, it's just been it's skyrocketing. And by the way, Captain Marvel's success, I called it.
Well, yes, you did. Now, hold on to your horses there, Rob. Captain Marvel has not crossed any $1 billion mark yet.
But it made $11 million on Monday, and that's pretty snazzy.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's for a Monday. On a Monday, it made, which is nuts. I mean, that's more than Aquaman made on its first Monday, and Aquaman's huge and all that kind of stuff. And by the way, let me give you your moment in the sun here, Robert. While I was insisting that this movie was going to come in between 90 and 100 million on opening weekend, you called 150. It came in at 153. So take your moment, Robert. The spotlight is on you.
Gloat. I'm not a gloater.
For you, Robert.
but what's really interesting is they're anticipating a $70 million second weekend, and with the midweek dollars the way that they are, we could be looking at the movie crossing 300 million domestic by next Monday.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what that second weekend drop off is, because it should be somewhere. I'm guessing around the 60% drop off mark. When you have a movie that opens this big, you generally get bigger drop off. So I'm expecting anywhere between like a 58 and a 65% drop off, which would be solid for this. And you're right, would put it well on its way to getting that 300 million domestically. How does it continue to perform overseas? Who knows? We'll find out soon enough, I'm sure. But yeah, you cannot understate the success that Captain Marvel's had so far. But the bigger picture here is this $18 billion mark, and it's the $20 billion elusive, impossible mark to reach. Its days are numbered, because I'm going to tell you what, the next movie that comes out in the MCU is going to push the MCU over $20 billion. Like, even if Endgame doesn't, even if Endgame doesn't make $2 billion, Captain Marvel is going to put it far enough over 18 billion that 20 billion is just going to become a matter of Endgame needing to make 1.7, maybe 1.8. And while I'm a little bit cautious to say that Endgame will hit the 2 billion. I think it's certainly likely, but it's possible that it won't. But there's no way that the MCU doesn't cross 20 billion. And then Robert, what do you do with a number like that? What do you do when this series is making 20 billion?
What's interesting is after Far From Home comes out, they'll have 23 movies. And 23 movies, and if you cross 20 billion, that means if you average that out, that's you're closing in on all of those movies. It's just staggering that all of these movies could average out to end up making. I mean, they wouldn't have grossed, but in the average, within the long run, can you imagine 23 movies and they could be 21 billion possibly?
It will be at 21 because I'm telling you what, after Endgame, you're going to get at 20 something. It's going to be 20 billion plus. And then Spider-Man Far From Home, I think, has a shot at joining the $1 billion club. I mean, but even if it comes in at like 900 million, 850 million, like Spider-Man Homecoming did, even if it just comes in there, you're now talking, after 23 movies, $21 billion. That's just idiotic. I mean, that's just ridiculous, that type of number.
But also, you can't sustain that. Eventually somebody there, it's like, look, I read comic books for 30 years. I went every Wednesday and bought comics. And then it got to the point where I'm like, I buy the omnibuses now, but the stories, superhero stories, just get ultimately repetitive because by definition, there's only so many stories that you can tell. And I really reached a point where I still enjoy comics a lot, and I love getting the omnibuses and things like that and the significant stories. But following weekly or monthly comic books now is I only buy the significant stories because I've read them all. They repeat, and you see the cycles in the storytelling. And how can they sustain this? I mean, they're shareholders. There's got to be enormous pressure from the people upstairs on Marvel and Kevin Feige, but this kind of success is unsustainable, and I don't know what they're going to do.
Well, I mean, look, the one things that Marvel has done really well is, and we talked a lot about it with Winter Soldier, Ant-Man things, they keep mixing up the genres. They never just put out, or at least only rarely do they put out just standard comic book movie. They've started playing around with getting into the mysticism with Doctor Strange, the political intrigue stuff of a Winter Soldier, a heist kind of film with a Ant-Man, a comedy kind of route with Thor Ragnarok. I mean, so it's going to stretch it out. Is it sustainable for 50 years? No, but no franchise is. No franchise is. I mean, you can even say Bond has kind of done this a little bit. So yeah, at some point it's going to run out of room. But 23 films at $21 billion, you're averaging nearly $1 billion a film. I guess it's just, oh God, it's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous at this point. Okay.